They call him the Ghost of the Ash Isles. It's a name whispered in dockside taverns, a name retold in stories by a dying firelight, a name that sows both terror and a grudging, profound respect. He was a legendary warrior, a leader of the forgotten. With an army of outcasts and broken souls, he seized an impossible victory, saving the very people who had once spat on his honor. History, in its gilded pages, will remember his name with the most radiant of titles. But there are truths that history dares not speak. There are whispers that time cannot erase. There is the price he paid for a single prayer offered in the heart of a storm on the eve of his defining battle. A desperate vow born from the depths of his pain and his faith. A bargain with destiny that twisted his most brilliant triumph into an unbearable agony, scarring his soul for all time. What was this terrible secret? And why did his greatest victory, the very moment an entire nation chanted his name in adoration, plant the seed for a tragedy that would shatter the heart of any father? The answer is not found in the Chronicles of Kings, but in the silent fall of tears, in a sacrifice made not with blood, but with something far more painful than death. Journey with us to the very end of this tale, because its conclusion will fundamentally change the way you see victory and sacrifice. It is not what you expect. And before we pull back the curtain on this long-held secret, let us know where you are in this world, and what time it is for you. Drop a comment below so we know that no matter where we are connected, listening together to a story that transcends both space and time. Our story begins in Lysara, the city-state of ivory towers and ships with sails the color of jade. Nestled against the shore of a sapphire ocean, Lysara was a jewel of civilization, a place where commerce thrived, the arts flourished, and the orthodox gods were worshipped in pristine temples of white marble. The sun seemed to hold a special affection for this city, pouring liquid gold upon its domes and cobbled streets. The hum of the marketplace, the distant sound of lutes from sun-drenched balconies, and the gentle lapping of waves against the hulls of merchant ships, all wove together into a symphony of life and prosperity. But in every paradise there are shadows, and in Lysara, that shadow bore a name, Kalin. Kalin was the son of Lord Valerius, the city's supreme ruler, yet he was no prince. His mother was not a noble lady of esteemed lineage. She was a priestess of the sea, a follower of the old gods, the primal entities of tide and tempest, that the high priests of Lysara had long since branded as heresy. She was a woman with eyes as deep as the ocean and a spirit as free as the wind. Lord Valerius, in a moment of weakness or perhaps of true untamed love, had been captivated by her. But that love was not strong enough to withstand the crushing weight of the council's judgment and the rigid dogma of the state. When Kalin was born, a living testament to this forbidden union, his mother was accused of defiling the Lord's bloodline and was exiled to a remote, forsaken island, leaving behind a son who would carry a cursed legacy. Kalin grew up within the very walls of his father's palace, but he moved through its halls like a phantom. He was fed, he was clothed, but he was never granted the warmth of an embrace or the comfort of a loving gaze. He was a living scar on the face of the Valerius family, a constant, uncomfortable reminder of his father's transgression. He was shunned not simply for being a bastard, but for carrying the tainted blood of a heretic. His younger half-brother Leon was the true heir of Lysara. Leon possessed the golden hair and cherubic smile of an angel, but his soul was a hollow cavern of insecurity and festering envy. He was physically frail, but his mind was a twisted labyrinth of cunning and cruelty. He saw in Kalin everything he was not: raw strength and innate courage and a preternatural gift for the arts of war. Even when Kalin was treated no better than a servant, the old soldiers in the training yard could not hide their admiration as he wielded a sword. Every one of those admiring glances was a dagger in Leon's fragile pride. This poisonous jealousy reached its boiling point on a fateful day. During a grand military exercise, Cailan, with his audacious and brilliant tactics, led his squadron to a stunning victory over lions. Lord Valerius, try as he might to hide it, could not suppress a flicker of pride in his eyes. That flicker was the spark that ignited the inferno. That night, Lion made his move. He crept into Cailan's chambers and planted a ceremonial dagger, its blade coated with a rare poison, the known symbol of a rival assassin's guild, among Cailan's belongings. The next morning he raised a hysterical alarm, claiming Cailan was plotting to assassinate their father and seize control of Lysara. The evidence, though fabricated, was damning. Cailan was dragged before the council. He searched his father's face, desperate for a sign of trust, a shred of defense, but all he found was silence. The cold, heavy silence of a father who had chosen his throne over his son. There was no trial, no chance to speak. Cailan was sentenced to permanent exile. As he was being led away, Lian moved past him and whispered, his voice a venomous hiss only Cailan could hear, "This world has no place for your kind. Go and rot in the wastes, heretic bastard." Stripped of everything, with nothing but the tattered clothes on his back and a shattered heart, Cailan was put on a small, unmanned boat and cast adrift into the open sea. As the ivory towers of Lysara faded into the horizon, he did not weep. The tears had long since dried up. Instead, a fire was kindled in his chest, the fire of survival. He would not die. He would live, if only to prove that a man's worth is not determined by his blood, but by the strength of his will. Cailan's boat washed ashore on the Ash Isles, a desolate volcanic chain to the east, a place the maps called the Land of the Forgotten. The air here was thick with the scent of sulfur, the ground a fine gray dust that crunched underfoot, and jagged volcanic rocks clawed at the sky like the fingers of a colossal skeleton. This was the place where the outcasts of civilized society came to die slowly. Thieves, murderers, debtors, and broken souls like Cailan. But Cailan had not come here to die. He had come to be reborn. The first days were a brutal, relentless fight for survival. He learned to find fresh water trapped in the crevices of rocks, to hunt the swift, scaly lizards that darted among the crags, and to conjure fire from the scant kindling the islands offered. His strength and skill in combat not only kept him alive, but earned him the fear of the other inhabitants. Yet it was not fear that made him a leader, it was compassion. One day, he witnessed a small gang of thugs tormenting a frail old man, trying to steal his last piece of dried bread. Without a moment's hesitation, Cailan intervened. With his bare hands, he dismantled the three men, not by killing them, but by disarming and humiliating them with swift, precise movements. He helped the old man to his feet, gave him back his bread, and declared to the stunned onlookers, "Here we are all men with nothing. If we prey on each other, we are less than beasts." That single act spread through the lawless land like wildfire. For the first time someone had stood up for the weak. Slowly, other outcasts began to gravitate towards him. They didn't seek a king, they sought a protector. Cailan taught them how to fight as a unit, how to build shelters that could withstand the harsh winds, how to hunt in coordinated groups. More importantly, he taught them honor. He established a simple code. You do not steal from your brother, you do not harm your brother, and what one earns, the community shares. From a ragtag mob, they became a tribe. From a tribe, they became a community. Cailan was more than a warrior. He was an architect of a new society. He built a family from broken pieces, creating a small world that was, in its own rugged way, more just than the polished city of Lysara. They called him the Ghost, for he had emerged from nothingness and brought order from chaos. He was the uncrowned king of the Ash Isles. And in that bleak world he found his one true light. A woman, another exile, had borne him a daughter before succumbing to the island's harsh conditions. He named the child Ilara. Ilara was the embodiment of all the goodness Kaelin had lost. She had her grandmother's sea-deep eyes, a radiant smile, and a spirit as resilient as the island wildflowers. To the world, Kaelin was a man of iron and stone, but with Ilara, he was a gentle father. He carved her dolls from driftwood and told her the stories of the stars his own mother had once told him. Ilara grew up among outcasts, but she knew no fear. She brought laughter and hope to that barren land. She was the heart of the Ash Isles, and she was Kaelin's entire world. He swore to himself that he would do anything to protect her, to ensure she would never know the pain of rejection that had defined his own life. He had built a fortress around his heart, and Ilara was the only treasure he kept inside. While Kaelin forged a kingdom from Ash, Lysara, the city that had cast him out, was beginning to rot from within. Under the rule of an aging Lord Valerius and his incompetent heir, Leon, the city-state's military might had withered. Leon, a master of palace intrigue, was utterly inept on the battlefield. He replaced skilled generals, men who had once respected Kaelin, with sycophantic courtiers. The army's discipline grew lax, its treasury plundered for lavish feasts and opulent vanity projects. Lysara was like a ripe fruit, beautiful on the outside, but festering with decay at its core. And then a true darkness fell from the north. From the savage plains, the Vulture clans descended. They were a terrifying confederation of nomadic tribes, ferocious and brutal, who lived by plunder and conquest. They knew no mercy, no honor, only an insatiable hunger for riches. Led by a fearsome warlord, they swept through the smaller territories like a desert sandstorm, and their eyes were now fixed on the glittering prize of Lysara. The war horns of the Vultures sounded their mournful cry. Their massive, disciplined army swarmed across the borders. Coastal villages were burned to the ground, their people taken as slaves. The army of Lysara, under the panicked command of Leon, was sent out to meet them. It was a catastrophe. Leon, who had never faced real danger, made a series of disastrous tactical errors. He divided his forces, exposed his flanks, and hesitated when he should have charged. In the first major battle, Lysara's army was routed. Thousands of soldiers were slaughtered, and Leon himself was among the first to flee the field, abandoning his men to be picked apart by the Vultures. News of the defeat swept through the capital like a plague. A chilling fear gripped Lysara. Citizens barred their doors, and wealthy merchants scrambled to escape by sea. Lord Valerius, upon hearing of his favored son's cowardice, collapsed, his health failing catastrophically. In the grand chamber of the Elder Council, the air was thick with despair. The faces of the nobles were pale, the old generals bowed their heads in shame. "We are lost," one elder moaned. "The Vultures will be at our gates within a fortnight. We have no one left to lead us." "Leon is a disgrace," a general roared, his voice cracking with fury. "He has destroyed our army." A heavy silence fell over the room. They had exhausted every option. And then the oldest elder, a man who had been present on the day of Kaelin's exile, spoke, his voice a frail, hesitant tremor. There is still one." Every eye in the room turned to him. "The son of the sea priestess," he continued, almost in a whisper. "The ghost of the Ash Isles, Kaelin." The name landed in the room like a thunderclap. Silence. Then an uproar. "Impossible!" another councilman shouted. "He is a heretic, an outcast. We cannot beg him for help." The old elder shook his head, his eyes shining with desperation. "And who would you rather beg? The Vultures? I have heard the tales from the sailors. Kaelin has forged an army from nothing. He has won battles no one thought possible. He is our only hope, however humiliating it may be." They had no other choice. The decision was made. A delegation of Lysara's most powerful elders, the same men who had stood by silently as Kaelin was cast out, now had to prepare for a journey to the Ash Isles. They would not carry swords or banners of state. They would carry their shame and a desperate plea for help, a plea to the very heretic son they had once banished. The journey to the Ash Isles was a penance. Their luxurious ships struggled against the treacherous currents and jagged reefs that guarded the forgotten islands. When they finally set foot on the main island, the first sensation was one of stark reality. The air was thick, the ground crunched under their fine leather boots like broken glass. The silence of the place was unnerving. They were escorted by two silent men whose faces were maps of scars. The eyes of the island's inhabitants followed them, filled not with curiosity, but with a cold, undisguised contempt. These were the men who had cast them out of the world. Now they came crawling back. Finally, they were brought before a large, open-faced cave, where Kalen sat on a flat rock, sharpening a long, wicked-looking sword. He did not look up as they approached, but his presence filled the space, a palpable aura of power and stillness. He was no longer the lean boy they remembered. He was a man forged in fire, with eyes that held the weight of 100 battles and 1,000 lonely nights. The lead elder cleared his throat, trying to maintain a shred of dignity. "Kalen, son of Valerius!" Screech. Kalen dragged the blade across the whetstone, a jarring sound that cut the elder's words short. He still did not look up. "I have no father, and I am no one's son." The silence became suffocating. The air grew tight, electric. The elder swallowed hard, his composure crumbling. "We come as representatives of Lysara. The city is in peril. The Vulture clans are ravaging the land. We need a commander. We need you." Kalen finally stopped his work. He slowly raised his head, and his eyes were like two chips of ice, boring into the very souls of the elders. He stood and walked towards them, each step measured and deliberate. "You need me?" He let out a short, hollow laugh, devoid of any humor. "You need me? Where were you when my mother was exiled? Where were you when I was framed by my own brother? Where were you when I was cast out to sea like a diseased dog? You were silent. Your silence was my sentence." The elders bowed their heads, unable to meet his gaze. "And now," Kalen continued, his voice hardening, "when your golden boy, the coward Leon, has led Lysara to the brink of annihilation, you come to me. What do you think I am, a tool to be used and then discarded when you are finished?" "We were wrong," the oldest elder finally said, his voice trembling with shame. "We were blinded by pride and dogma. But this is no longer about the past. This is about the future of our people." Kalen stared at them, the raw contempt in his eyes slowly giving way to a cold, calculating resolve. "If I agree, what is my price?" "Anything you want," an elder blurted out eagerly. "Gold, land." "I have no need for such things," Kalen interrupted. "What I want, I can take for myself. I want justice." He paused, letting his words hang in the air like a death sentence. "I want a public decree, not for me, but for my mother. Her name will be cleared. She will be remembered not as a heretic, but as a revered priestess of the sea. I want the men who conspired with my brother to be punished. I want supreme, absolute command of the armies, with no interference from the council or from Leon." He looked the lead elder directly in the eye. "And I want my dear brother Leon to serve under me as a common foot soldier." The demands were staggering. They were not just a bid for power, they were an upheaval of Lysara's entire social and religious order, but they had no choice. The journey back to Lysara was made in a strange, tense silence. Kalen brought with him his most loyal warriors, men and women who wore the scars of exile, but whose eyes now burned with the fire of vindication. The night before the decisive battle was a maelstrom. The sky churned with black clouds, and lightning tore across the horizon. The unified army of Lysara and the Ash Isles was a nervous camp, a mixture of suspicion and desperate hope. The soldiers of Lysara watched the warriors of the Isles, the ghosts, with a mixture of fear and awe. Kaelin stood alone on a high precipice overlooking the valley where the colossal army of the Vulture clans was encamped, their fires stretching out like a sea of malevolent stars. He could hear the thrum of their war drums, a savage, hungry rhythm carried on the wind. The weight of a nation, of those who loved him and those who loathed him, pressed down on his shoulders. He was their last hope. If he failed, Lysara would be nothing but a memory. He felt more alone than ever before. He thought of his mother, her face a fading image. He thought of Alara, safe on the Ash Isles. He thought of the father who had remained silent, of the brother who was somewhere in the camp below, likely cursing his name. He was surrounded by people, yet he had no one. In that moment of ultimate desperation and fierce, primal faith, Kaelin fell to his knees. He turned his face to the raging storm, and he did not pray to the marble gods of Lysara. He prayed to his mother's gods, the wild entities of the ocean and the sky. Gods of sea and sky, spirits of the storm and the calm, his voice was nearly lost in the howling wind. I was cast out, I was scorned, but I have returned. If you are truly there, hear me now, grant me this victory. Let me crush this enemy, let me save this people. And if you grant me this, I vow. He took a great, shuddering breath, rain and tears mixing on his face. I vow, whatever first comes forth from the doors of my house in Lysara, to greet me upon my return in glory, it shall be yours. I will consecrate it to you forever. The vow was made, a raw, ambiguous promise born from the heart of a lonely man's agony. He did not consider the consequences. In his mind, a consecration could mean a prized animal, a chest of gold, a captured slave. He only knew he had to offer something immense, to bargain with the cosmos for the salvation of a people. The vow flew into the night, witnessed by the storm, and a strange peace settled over Kaelin's soul. He no longer felt fear. He knew he would win, but he did not know that his whisper in the storm had just become a thread of fate, slowly, inexorably tightening around his future. The dawn broke, a lurid, blood-red sun rising over the battlefield. The battle began. It was not a battle. It was a masterfully orchestrated slaughter. Kaelin, using his intimate knowledge of the terrain and a warrior's psychology forged in years of hardship, turned his motley army into a killing machine. He didn't meet the enemy head-on. He used guerrilla tactics, luring them into narrow passes, setting ambushes and striking at their supply lines. His warriors from the Ash Isles, accustomed to fighting in harsh conditions, moved like specters, sowing chaos and terror in the ranks of the Vulture clans. Kaelin fought at the very front, his sword a blur of silver lightning. He was the focal point, the central flame of their resolve. The soldiers of Lysara, initially hesitant, were inspired by his courage and genius, and they fought with a ferocity they never knew they possessed. They roared his name, Kaelin, Kaelin. By day's end, the field was littered with the corpses of the Vultures. Their warlord had been cut down by Kaelin himself. The remnants of their army fled in a panicked rout back to the northern wastes from which they came. Lysara was saved. The news of the victory reached the capital. The city erupted. The great bells of the temples rang ceaselessly as people poured into the streets, dancing, singing, embracing. They forgot the heresy. They forgot the exile. In that moment, Kaelin was their hero, their savior. Kaelin and his army made their triumphant return, marching through a sea of adoring citizens. Flowers rained down upon his horse's path. The cheers were deafening, but amid the celebration, Kaelin's heart was a stone in his chest. The vow he made in the storm echoed in his mind. What would be the price of this victory? He rode through the familiar streets toward his father's palace, the house he had claimed as his in his vow. He was anxious, but he tried to calm himself. It would be a dog, he thought, or a servant rushing out to be the first with the news. Anything but. He reined in his horse before the great oaken doors. The crowd fell silent, holding its collective breath, waiting for the hero to enter his home. Kaelin dismounted, his heart pounding against his ribs. He took a deep, steadying breath, and the doors swung open. And in that instant, Kaelin's world shattered. The first person to emerge, to stumble out, was Leon, his brother. His fine clothes were torn, his body was covered in blood. He collapsed onto the steps, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. But that was not the most horrifying sight. In his arms, he was carrying a small, limp form. A cascade of long, black hair obscured the face. It was a girl, and Kaelin recognized the dress, the one he had painstakingly stitched for his daughter from the finest sea silk he could find. Lysara. She was unconscious, a dark crimson stain spreading from her side. The roar of the crowd died. A ghastly, profound silence descended. 1,000 eyes were fixed on the tragic tableau. Kaelin stood frozen, unable to breathe, unable to think. He had conquered an army, but here, on the threshold of his glory, he was defeated by the very destiny he had challenged. It was the cruelest of twists. The vow had been answered, claiming not one but two, the one he hated most and the one he loved more than life itself. The first sensation was not pain, but a cold, hollowing void. Kaelin surged forward, shoving Leon aside as he gathered Lysara into his arms. Her body was cold, her breath so shallow it was barely a whisper against his cheek. Lysara, my daughter," he roared, his voice breaking into 1,000 jagged pieces. An old physician rushed from the crowd, his trembling hands searching for a pulse. After a silence that stretched for an eternity, he looked up at Kaelin. "She lives, my lord. The pulse is there, but faint. She is gravely wounded, but there is still hope." A flicker of hope ignited in the darkness, only to be immediately choked by the terrible reality of the vow. At that moment, Leon, who had been crumpled on the ground, began to sob, the racking, gasping sounds of a man utterly broken by guilt and fear. He crawled forward, clutching at Kaelin's leg. "It was my fault, all of it," he confessed through his tears. I was so jealous. I couldn't stand to see them cheering for you. I arranged it. I hired bandits to attack Alara's escort as she was being brought from the Isles. I only wanted to humiliate you, to show everyone that you couldn't even protect your own daughter." He looked up, his face a mess of blood and tears. "But I never meant for this to happen. When they drew their knives, when they were going to harm her, I don't know what came over me. I charged them, I fought them, I killed one of them and was wounded, but I got her away." The confession hung in the air, naked and ugly. The crowd was stunned into silence. Kaelin looked from the weeping wreck of his brother to the pale face of his daughter. A volcanic rage surged within him, a desire to tear lion limb from limb. But then, as he looked into Leon's eyes and saw the genuine, soul-deep remorse, something inside him shifted. He saw not an enemy, but a lost and frightened soul who had committed a terrible, catastrophic mistake. The high priests of Lysara, their faces a mixture of stern piety and grim satisfaction, pushed their way forward. "The vow must be fulfilled, Kaelin. The gods have granted you victory, and they have chosen their consecration. A life must be given to pay the debt." They demanded a blood sacrifice. They wanted to see Lysara or Leon or both offered upon the altar to appease their rigid gods. Kaelin gently passed Alara's still form into the arms of a waiting woman. He rose slowly to his full height. He faced the priests, and for the first time since his return, his voice held not the cold edge of a warrior, but the profound authority of a sage. "You are right," he said, and the crowd held its breath. "The vow must be fulfilled, but you have misunderstood the gods, and you have misunderstood the meaning of sacrifice." He turned, his gaze sweeping over the thousands of watching faces. To consecrate is not to kill. To consecrate is to give away. He pointed to Lysara. I will consecrate my daughter to the gods, not by taking her life, but by giving her a life of service. I will give her to the sanctuary, where she will become a healer, to bring life, not death. From this day forward, she is no longer my daughter. She belongs to the gods and to the people. I will never call her daughter again, never hold her as a father. That is my sacrifice. Then he turned to Leon, who was still trembling on the ground. And I will consecrate my brother, not by taking his pathetic life, but by forgiving him, by giving him a second chance to live a life of honor. I will sacrifice my hatred, the poison that has eaten at my soul for all these years. He knelt, facing Leon, and placed a hand on his brother's shoulder. Get up, Leon. Together we will rebuild Lysara. A stunned silence fell over the square, a silence so profound you could hear the distant cry of a seagull. Then slowly, one person began to clap, then another, and then a thunderous roaring wave of applause erupted. An ovation not for a military victory, but for a far greater one. The victory of forgiveness over hatred, of life over death, of wisdom over dogma. Kalin had not broken his vow. He had elevated it, transforming a potential curse into a profound blessing. It was an ending no one had foreseen, a heartwarming resolution born from the ashes of tragedy. The years flowed by like a river to the sea. Lysara did not just recover, it flourished under the joint leadership of the two brothers. Kalin, with his wisdom and resolve, became a just and revered ruler, though a quiet melancholy always lingered in his eyes, a private distance no one could ever fully cross. Leon, redeemed by his brother's forgiveness, was a transformed man. He became Lysara's most loyal and capable military commander, dedicating the rest of his life to atoning for his past sins. The bond between the brothers was no longer one of animosity, but of a deep, unspoken respect and understanding. And Lysara, the little girl from the Ash Isles, became the city's greatest blessing. She lived in the central sanctuary, not as a prisoner of a vow, but as its high priestess. She never married, never had children of her own, but she became a mother to thousands. Drawing on the herbal knowledge passed down from Kalin's mother and a boundless well of compassion, she became the greatest healer the city-state had ever known. They called her the Saint of the Sanctuary, a living legend. Kalin and Lysara never met again as father and daughter. He would sometimes stand in the back of a crowd, watching her tend to the sick, his heart a mixture of pride and a quiet, enduring ache. She, in turn, would sometimes see his familiar, solitary figure among the sea of faces and offer a small, knowing smile, a connection that transcended words. The legacy Kalin left behind was not of the battles he had won, but of the sacrifice he had chosen. Instead of a tradition mourning a tragedy, the people of Lysara established an annual pilgrimage to the sanctuary to receive Lysara's blessing, to celebrate the day that forgiveness had triumphed. Kalin's sacrifice had turned a tragic vow into a spiritual cornerstone for his entire nation. The story of Kalin's vow was passed down through generations. It was no longer the tale of a warrior, but the tale of a father who learned that true victory is not measured by what you conquer, but by what you are willing to let go. The vow, for a terrifying moment, seemed to have cost him his daughter, but in the grand tapestry of time, it had given the world a saint, and it had given him back his brother. And that, perhaps, was the greatest miracle of all, a miracle written not by the gods, but by the broken yet magnificent heart of a human being. Thank you for listening to the very end. Stories like this on our channel are not just for entertainment. They are here to remind us of the incredible strength and capacity for grace that lies within the human spirit. If this story has moved you, if it has made you think, then please consider subscribing. Every single subscription is a vote of encouragement, a signal for us to continue searching for and sharing the tales that can illuminate a small corner of our world.